It's a very common belief to think that the book of Job is one of the oldest books in the Bible, or at least older than the Torah or Pentateuch. I had this belief for a long time too. I don't think just because I'm also a child of the mid-'80s, but I had this belief all the way up and through my master's degree in biblical studies. It wasn't until my PhD program I took an entire course on the book of Job at LSTC, and I remember very vividly sitting there on the first day of class, and the professor had us go around in a circle and sort of give our initial impressions of the book of Job, our experience with the book of Job up until that point before we started the class. And I remember mentioning, like offhandedly, oh, isn't it the oldest book in the Bible? And the professor was like, why do you think that? And I had absolutely nothing to give to her for why I thought that. But I had thought that somehow that had gotten in my head too. And I've encountered plenty of other people who also think this. I think it may be because, I think the reason many like lay level people believe this is not so much because like the text claims this, right? But rather because the text has these old vibes, right? Job chapter 1, verse 1, I'm paraphrasing here, but it basically says like a long time ago in a faraway place, right? So that gives it this archaic sense, like it's set in a very distinct time from all the other texts in the Hebrew Bible. There's also no mention anywhere in the book of Job of like important historical touchstones like the matriarchs and patriarchs or Moses and the Exodus or the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Those aren't ever discussed as though the story is set long before any of those events. I think also because the book of Job opens with this prose narration of the divine counsel, which is something we almost never get in the Hebrew Bible. There are some poetic references to the divine counsel. There's some oracular visions of the divine counsel, but a straightforward just story about the divine counsel, about God and the sons of God and this Satan character. I think this is the only example actually of a narrative prose account of it that I can think of, at least off the top of my head. So it's pretty rare. And I think that also the fact that we like get this behind the scenes look at how primordial reality works, that also gives it this archaic feel. And so I think it's more for these reasons than anything else that people commonly believe that the book of Job is the oldest book in the Bible, or one of the oldest books in the Bible. Despite this intuition that many lay-level people have, biblical scholars generally believe that the book of Job is actually one of the youngest texts in the Hebrew Bible, definitely a post-exilic, after the end of Babylonian exile, after 539 BCE. It must have been written after there, and that's what you'll find most frequently in contemporary mainstream academic biblical commentaries that consider the dating of the book of Job after that point, for a variety of reasons. Let me mention 4 of those reasons, maybe in sort of like descending order of persuasiveness or something. First, and perhaps foremost, and I'll write some resources in the description below so you can go take a look at some articles in support of this. First, the book of Job quotes several very specific phrases from 2nd Isaiah. 2nd Isaiah is a term that biblical scholars use to refer to Isaiah's chapter 40 through 55, which are also composed towards the end of the 6th century BCE. So the book of Job seems to be borrowing some very specific theologically laden phrases from the book, from 2nd Isaiah. So obviously if it's borrowing from that, it needs to be written after that. If those texts are written at the end of the 6th century BC, then Job, in its final form at least, would also need to be composed after the 6th century BC, after the exile. Another reason is that there's a large amount of Aramaic influence in the book of Job. Now, Aramaic influence sort of goes on a sliding scale. It's not in an earlier video I had talked about Persian loanwords. If a text has a Persian loanword in it, it must have been written after exile. Aramaic influence isn't quite that like definitive of a marker. It comes in a scale. Some texts have just a very small amount of Aramaic influence. Some texts have a substantial amount of Aramaic influence. But the more Aramaic influence a text has in it, the more likely it is to be composed after the exile. Again, because Persia became the dominant empire of the day, and Persia took as its administrative language Aramaic. So that begins to affect the way that texts are composed all throughout Persian vassal states, including the Persian province of Yehud, or Judea. So it begins to affect the way that they compose their stories. Job has a pretty significant amount of Aramaic influence, several dozen instances of very clear influence from Aramaic. So that pushes it again also to the 6th century BCE or later. A couple other corroborating points. It is a piece of wisdom literature. Generally speaking, the wisdom literature is a late genre of literature. The other instances in the canonical Hebrew Bible of wisdom literature, Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, are also in their final forms post-exilic texts. Other pieces of wisdom literature in like the Apocrypha or the deuterocanonical texts, things like Sirach or the Wisdom of Solomon, those are also post-exilic texts all the way down into the Greek period. So it's just by default, unless we have some very strong reason to believe otherwise, wisdom literature tends to get pushed down into this post-exilic period as well. It seems that that's where they are concentrated. Another corroborating piece of evidence is the existence of Satan in Job chapter, in these opening chapters of the book of Job. There are only 3 references to Satan as an actual character in the entirety of the Hebrew Bible, one in 1 Chronicles, one in Zechariah, and then here in Job. Those are the only times the character appears, and all of these texts are post-exilic texts. One pervasive theory is that the Persian religion of Zoroastrianism, which is a very dualistic religion, influenced Jewish thinkers to sort of reconceptualize the divine as having this more positive force in Yahweh and this more negative or oppositional force in Satan. Regardless of where it comes from, all our references to Satan as a character seem to be post-exilic texts. So you add these things together and a couple other things, and we commonly get a dating for the book of Job in the 6th century BCE or later. Now, as for like your specific question here, predating the Torah, now again, that depends on the dating of the Torah, and there's lively and widespread arguments about the dating of the final form of the Torah. It depends on the biblical scholar you talk to. It could be the case that the book of Job, even if it were composed or reached its final form in the end of the 6th century BC, could still be older than sections of the Torah, and could still be older than the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, coming together as a unit. So there could still be some truth to this idea, just perhaps in an unexpected way. But hopefully those thoughts help you think through this a little bit as well.